with your host, Elisa Bielatich Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
It is Sunday, October 16th, 2022, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm Elisa Bielatich Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. We get together here every Sunday night to meet an Orthodox Christian and to build community through conversation. I think that Orthodoxy feels a little fragmented for those of us in North America, right? Because we have so many different jurisdictions. We worship in different languages. Sometimes we're even on different calendars. And, it's easy to find out one day that you've been living next door to another Orthodox person for 10 years and you didn't know about it because they were at a different parish. So I think it's really, really lovely for us to have this project where we're sort of working on, I would call it Orthodox unity, really, because I think Orthodox unity is not really about language. It's not about bishops. It's not about any of that. It's really about seeing one another as beloved brothers and sisters in Christ. And so I love the idea of just getting to know some more Orthodox people. And frankly, Orthodox people are really interesting. We come from all different sorts of backgrounds, lots of different countries people have immigrated from, or their grandparents immigrated. People grow up in these interesting, immigrant families here in the New World or back in the old country. It's all fascinating. And then, of course, there are a whole bunch of converts, and everyone's come from different places, and they find their way to the faith in different ways. So I think it's all very interesting. So I'm delighted that you're here with us. And, actually, we have a wonderful guest tonight, and I want to apologize because I think the audio quality is probably a little lower tonight because, unfortunately, I'm coming in at you from a telephone instead of our usual clear, beautiful connection. But surely we'll have those tech issues fixed by next week, so hang in with us. But remember, you still can call in live. Even though I'm on a phone, you can call in on your phone. The number is 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Matushka Trudy Richter is here tonight. She's engineering the program, and she'll be taking your calls. And she's a delight, really, so it's worth calling just to talk to her. But also, you're going to want to talk to our guest because he's really neat. His name is Mena Mesiha, and I may or may not be getting his last name right. But he's really neat, actually. He's a board-certified orthopedic surgeon. Okay, so he's a shoulder surgeon, but he was born in Egypt. He's a Coptic Orthodox man, and he moved to Puerto Rico. So picture this, right? Like he's Egyptian. Then when he's 5, he moves to Puerto Rico. And then by the time he's 10, he moves up to New York. So it's kind of a fascinating story, I think, and I'm looking forward to hearing it. And so he ultimately settled in eastern Massachusetts, where his wife is originally from there. And they have 3 young kids, elementary age-ish. And I think he's awesome. So we're gonna talk to Mena tonight. And without any further ado, Mena, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
We're glad to have you. Thank you for hanging in with us. Right before the show started, there were so many little technical glitches with your connection and mine. So I appreciate it.
That's okay. I like to roll with however things go.
That's a good quality. It's a very good quality, especially in live radio. So it works out well. But
Absolutely.
Well, I want to hear a little bit about that. You were born in Egypt, and I know you left when you were 5, but tell me the story, first of all, just about, the starting of your life, but also I want to know a little bit about what Egypt is like and what the city you're from is like.
So I'm actually from Assiut, which is about a couple hundred kilometers south of Cairo. It's a very Christian town comparatively. So Egypt, as you know, is predominantly a Muslim country in the Middle East. So by and large, Cairo, Alexandria, most of the northern parts of Egypt are very Muslim dominated. So Assiut is actually interesting because, there's a huge Christian population, and there's like a running joke that like, oh, everybody who's Christian, has some ties to Assiut. Like they either are from there, or like their cousins there, or like they grew up there, or like their grandparents were from there. So it's, like it's a good place to be from. My parents never really planned on leaving. They were very happy there. They were both professors of pharmacy at the university there, which, is a rare thing. Like there's not a lot of faculty positions that get offered to Christians, just, partly because of like the predominant, like, just population, like percentage wise, statistically speaking, but also because, not surprisingly, that there's some sort of low key discrimination that happened. And so, it's kind of like a special thing for people to have those faculty positions being Christian. So for two of them, and for both of them to be married to each other, was kind of like a fluke thing. So they ended up getting invited to teach in University of Puerto Rico. It was supposed to be like a year or two, but ended up being 5 years. So we left when I was 5. So by the time, they had already been there for several years, they were like, well, we can't exactly go back to Egypt because the cultural difference, you can imagine, is very, very different. So, every country's got its own like little, flavor. So Egypt is very, very different from the United States. So, yeah, so I think they figured like it would be too much of a culture shock for me to go back.
Wow. Well, and it probably would have been, really, like it probably would have been, but that's a big deal to both to leave in the first place when you're from a lovely place, when you love it there, and then also to sort of make that decision that it's a better choice for your son to move somewhere else. That's pretty amazing. Do you have a lot of memories of growing up in? Actually, 2 questions. One is, you mentioned that this is sort of a Christian town, or at least that percentage-wise there are more Christians than in the rest of Egypt. You hear stories about persecution, especially it seems of priests in Cairo. Does that sort of stuff also happen there, or because there are more Christians, are things a little easier?
No, I mean, it happens kind of all over Egypt. It's sort of like a cost of, doing business. And, I think different people sort of take different perspectives on it. Like I think, some people like to play it off and say, but it's okay, and we all get along. And then some people like, are, more maybe more affected by it or more upset by it, and they're more vocal about it. But whether or not, like, it's something that we talk about regularly, for sure, it's something that, happens on, I think, not just on this, like, irregular basis with like, sort of like, really bad things that happen with like murders and bombs and things like that. But like, I think like the worst kind of discrimination is the one that like people pretend doesn't even exist, right? Like it's the, oral exam, right? Like my dad used to tell me, like, my dad's name was Munir Sobhi Mesiha. And Munir is like a neutral name. Sobhi is like a neutral name, but Mesiha means Christian. So they'd be like, what's your name? He'd be like, Munir. And they'd be like, Munir what? They'd be like, Munir Sobhi. And they'd be like, Munir Sobhi what? He'd be like, Munir Sobhi Mesiha. They'd be like, okay, tell me blah, blah, blah. Like they would get to the point. Right. And some people would have like, 5 names before they got a Christian name. So it'd be like, Bob what? Bob, Franklin. Bob Franklin what? Bob Franklin, like, desk chair. Peter. Oh, Peter. Okay, yeah. Okay, gotcha. Like, as long as they got to some name that like could go one way or the other, they'd be like, okay,
right.
Now we know who we're dealing with. Because they wouldn't be allowed to ask. They can't like overtly ask you like, are you Christian, right? They can't be like,
right.
Recite something, right? They'd be like, what's your name? And they'd get the information that they needed that way.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, they just keep pushing until they hit the Christian name or the Muslim name, right? Like,
right.
Muhammad, and they're
as
like,
long as they get
gotcha.
what they, right.
Yeah, Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So do you remember living in Egypt at all, or is everything you know
So
about Egypt really from visiting and hearing about it after
visiting,
leaving?
right. And we
Yeah.
used to go back every 2 years. So like we left when I was 5, and like we went back the summer when I was 7, and the summer when I was 9, and the summer when I was 11. So I'm really close with my cousins, and we all like sort of grew up together, and we all know each other like very, very well. But up until we were like in our 20s, I was always like the American cousin. Now,
Yeah.
all the cousins are all over the world. I've got cousins in Texas, Toronto, Australia, like, all over the world. But, when we were growing up, I was the only one that had emigrated at the time. So I was like the unique one that was like different from everybody else. So it's interesting now that like everybody's everywhere, but I was the one that was different. So.
When you were a kid, did you kind of hate that? Like when you go, my kids, we live in Texas. The whole family's back in California, and they go visit, and they're the Texas cousins. And when they were little, it was a lot of wistful, like, oh, I wish we lived closer. I wish we lived there. And then eventually, I think that kind of went away by the time they were older. But when you were a kid, did you feel that? Like, gosh, I wish my parents had never left Egypt.
I mean, I think at the time there was some of that. But I think, as we're growing up, and I just had a talk with the high school group at our parish yesterday about unity and diversity. And we were talking about, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, about how like, everybody's like a little bit different. And like, you can't look at somebody else and say, well, I'm better than you because I'm blah, blah, blah. And you can't look at them like say, oh man, I'm not as good as so-and-so. Like everybody's important. And like, sometimes weaknesses end up being strengths. Sometimes strengths end up being weaknesses. And, I think it's hard to track, like in retrospect, was, emigrating first like a weakness or a strength, right? Like it was initially like like embarrassing. Like I'd go back and I'd like speak Arabic, and they'd make fun of my Arabic, and they'd be like, what'd you say? I'd be like, I said blah, blah, blah. And they're like, that's not how you say that. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, you don't want to be like, well, I speak fluent English, and like doesn't that count for something?
Right.
And it's
right.
like,
My English
no,
is
not
a
really.
lot better than yours.
And
no, it doesn't feel like that when you visit, though, because it's all of them are so good at Arabic, and they're pointing out like just the one of you, right?
Right, and it's not like I was fluent in Arabic. Like it wasn't like, I didn't speak Arabic. Like I was fluent. They would make fun of like my accent, or they'd make fun of like the way that I said something, or like a vocabulary thing that like I said the wrong word. And it's like, guys, like we're splitting hairs here. Like I don't think I'm as bad as you're making me seem to be, but like, it was definitely like, it was humbling, and it was like, and now like I credit them for my ability to speak Arabic fluently. Like if I go back to Egypt, it takes me a while to like sort of get reacclimated, but like after like, like a week or two, like I'm already like comfortable, and like that like idea of like, I'm not translating, I'm just speaking, like I'm thinking in Arabic, and I'm, interacting with people like sort of without translating, which I don't think would have been the case if my cousins didn't give me such a hard time.
That's pretty great, actually.
Yeah,
great.
It is. Right. And that's why like it's hard to track. Like it's not a bad thing.
Did you take classes to like read and write in Arabic, or did your family teach you all of that?
No. So my cousins taught me the alphabet, and I went to college, and, was encouraged by that. Like, right. Like they inspired me to be like, okay, like if I know the alphabet, like, maybe I can, actually start like, formally studying. And I had, a language requirement in college. So I took Arabic. I was like, okay, like, I might as well, right? Like I'd already like learned like Spanish in Puerto Rico, and I learned French in high school. So, I was like, okay, like the language that I could learn the most and to be most functional in is actually Arabic, because I speak it fluently. So I might as well learn to read and write. And the professor there ended up being like phenomenal. Like I love the guy. He's like one of my favorite professors. So I actually ended up taking Arabic every semester in college, and ended up doing a minor in Near Eastern Studies as an extension of that, because it's the same department as like Christian history, and like like a lot of Middle Eastern, Near Eastern things are connected to Christianity. So between taking electives in Christianity and like language in Arabic, it ended up being like a full major, which was pretty cool.
Oh, that's neat. That's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but we're getting ahead of ourselves now, because now we're all the way to college. And I still don't know, like, what kind of a kid were you? What were you like when you were younger? Did you know that you were going to be a doctor because both of your parents were like pharmacists, professors, right? Were you just like, I'm earmarked for medicine already? What was it like?
I was a free spirit. So all I knew is I wasn't going to be a pharmacist, and all I knew was that I was not going to live up to my parents' expectations. Like, those two things were clear. Like, I was like, okay, like, and I would tell them that. I'm like, guys, like, you guys are maniacs. Like, you guys were they were each like number one in their class. Like, my dad grew up in Alexandria and my mom grew up in Assiut. I'm like, what would have happened if you guys grew up in the same town? You guys would have killed each other. Like, who's going to be number one? Like, it would have been like a death match, and you guys would have like one of you would not have been able to come out of it. And they were like, but you can do better. I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah.
Better than number one.
Right. Like, I can, like, it's like, whatever. Like, and I never really cared about, I always cared about learning. Like, I always thought things were interesting. But I never really cared too much about, what sort of extrinsic things were sort of attached to it. Like there was just too much, I was already fully saturated from my parents, building in this desire for extrinsic, oh, you got to get good grades and you got to do this and you got to do that. I was already over it by the time I was in ninth grade. I was like, listen, I'm just going to show up. I'm going to do my best. Whatever grades I get, I'm going to get. I don't care. It's not really that interesting to me. Because no matter what it was so funny because no matter what I did, it wasn't good enough. It was 97. Not bad. What do you mean not bad? The closest grade was a 91. Next time you'll do better. All right.
Yeah.
No, never mind. I'm just gonna stop. This is not going to work. I'm not going to find any satisfaction in this specific arena. So I might as well stop trying. I recently did a podcast actually with one of the other doctors in my practice. So he has a consulting group, and his name is Chris Jonkus. He's a great guy, and he works with a woman named Nancy who's really funny, and they have a podcast together, and they invited me, and I was like, hey guys, I'm running a little bit late. I just need to drop off my mom at her apartment, and I'll be right there. And they were like, why don't you bring her? I was like, I don't know if that's a good idea. they're like, no, bring her. I'm like, what's she gonna do? They're like, oh, we'll put her on. I was like, okay. So we show up with my mom, and that was one of their questions. They were like, so did you always want to be a doctor? I'm like, it's kind of a tough question for me to answer with my mom here. And she was like, of course you did, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, of course I didn't. And she was like, we never pushed, and we always just guided, and we recommended. There was all these sort of subtle coercive things. And I was like, sure, yeah, only recommended. So yeah, I think if it was up to me, I'd have a food truck or a restaurant or something like that. But I think first of all, people that have businesses like that probably work a lot harder than I do now, realistically, truly, and honestly. Medical training is very, very difficult, but once you're done with your training, you get a lot of privileges, and there's a lot of flexibility that's afforded to you that I am appreciating very much now, in my 40s. But yeah, growing up, I was like, I'm gonna do that. It sounds like a lot of work. That. So yeah.
But what happened? What happened to change it? So you go to school, you're studying. You're not studying.
Yeah.
You're not pre-med, right? You weren't pre-med in college. Where'd you go to school?
I was required to be pre-med. That was one of one of the
fun. We'll
costs
pay
of
for
doing
college as long as you're pre-med.
Right. I mean, like it wasn't even that. It was like, no, this is what you're doing. I'm like, but I want to do engineering. So I was, like I was really mostly interested in math in high school. Like everything else like was okay, like it was fine, but like the math is what like really interested me. And like it really wasn't because of a grade. Like actually my senior year math teacher, like of all the people that have ever disliked me, I don't think anyone has disliked me more than my senior year math teacher. So like I vividly remember there was like one test where like I think I was traveling, I was on like Model UN or something like that, and I didn't even care about Model UN. I just wanted to go hang out with my friends. So I didn't do well on a test. I think I got a 13 out of 100 on the test. And so she wrote on the test, this is the worst. So there's two calculus classes, like the AB class and the BC class, and the BC class is the one that basically does like 2 semesters of college calculus like in the year, and it was for like the stronger math students. And I was in the BC class, and there's only like 8 or 10 of us, and she wrote, this is the worst BC paper I've seen in 25 years of teaching. You can and probably will fail this course. And this was the best part. She writes, please don't ever tell anyone I was ever your teacher. I was like, okay. So,
oh my goodness.
I thought like this was like a pretty strong move for like a high school kid. Like I don't know like where I got like the composition to do this, but like I asked her for a meeting and I met with her, and I was like, Dr. So and so, like, I'm really like, I don't think I'm applying myself as much as I could in this class, but I'm also like distracted with like senior year stuff, which is not an excuse. It's just kind of like what's happening. I am pretty good at math, so I ended up going to like nationals for mathletes, and like our school was like pretty good at math, so we sent like I think 2 kids that year to like the national competition in Washington D.C. And I was one of them, and I was like, I'm pretty good at math. I think if like we try to work together a little bit better, like maybe I'll do better on the tests, but like I don't know, like I don't know if writing this right really encourages me. And she goes, Mena, where are you going to go to school next year? And I go, well, either this school or that school. She goes, those are very good schools. And so this was like already like spring, right? Like, because I already got into school, I was deciding where I want to go. So it must have been like, like February, March, something like that. And she goes, those are very good schools. She goes, you're not going to get a high enough score on your AP exam to place out of calculus. So you're going to be taking calculus at one of those schools. I know both of those professors, and I don't want you to tell them that you went to school here or that I taught you, because I would be embarrassed at how bad you are at calculus coming out of my course. And I was like, well,
wow.
That answers that.
Wow. What a just natural teacher's heart, huh? Like,
I know, right? I think it was her last year.
And like, you're very bright. You're just not applying yourself. None of that. Just don't embarrass me. Don't pretend you never saw me.
Yeah. It was her last year. I think she was like bitter about like retiring. And I think like, I think in previous years she would have shown up a little bit differently, but I think, she was going on through her own issues of like not wanting to retire. And she ended up going to a different teaching situation. She ended up actually teaching college at a university in Manhattan. So like she was a very good calculus teacher. Like that wasn't the issue, but like I don't know, like or like my sort of like irreverence and like like I've been dealing with this 18 years already. I'm like, listen, I'm over this like bad cop thing. Like it's just not going to work with me. So yeah, I just don't think we're
like meet my parents. You'll see. I've heard.
Yeah, I was like I'm so like I said, I was saturated. Like there was nothing you could do to me that would like intimidate me or make me feel like, oh, like I really want to achieve because you scared me. Like no, that's not going to work, right? So yeah, I think I wanted to do engineering. And I think partly from the discouragement from my parents and partly from the discouragement of, this teacher that I guess for whatever reason, we never really clicked. So I ended up getting a 5 on the AP exam. So I placed out of calculus. She was so bitter. She was so upset. She was so upset. Because I just studied for a week, and I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, this seems fine. And I just showed up for the test, and she was so mad. I didn't even get a.
You self-taught, right? You didn't even require her.
Yeah, no, I just kind of figured it out, and I was like, oh, whatever.
Right? It's I taught myself. I didn't really need you anyway.
Yeah, I was fine.
Thanks for not helping. Thanks for nothing.
I have no idea. I have no idea how. It was one of those in the movies where I blanked out. What happened? It's you got everything right. I did. That's amazing.
That's awesome.
So I think in a different environment, I probably would have done an engineering undergrad. And my path would have been completely different. But with those sort of two key factors, the requirement was basically you're going to go into medicine, you're going to do pre-med, you're going to major in biology. So I actually ended up graduating with I don't know, I think it was probably 40 credits more than I needed because I took all of the classes that I had to take for bio and for pre-med. And then I took all the classes that I wanted to take. So I took both at the same time. And my last semester, actually, my parents found out that I didn't even need to be there. I already had enough credits to graduate, and my parents were so pissed. They were like, "You could have graduated early." I'm like, actually, I could. If I took 2 summer classes last summer, I probably could have skipped my senior year. And they're like, "Why didn't you do that?" I'm like, "Because I didn't want to come home."
That's hilarious.
They were like, we paid, and at the time it was cheaper. Yeah, they were paying $20, $30. I don't even know what they were paying. They were paying $20,000-$30,000 a semester or something, or not, maybe not a semester. I truly and honestly don't know. And people think that I'm spoiled because I don't know and I don't care. But it was kind of listen, I just needed to get through that phase of my life until I could get somewhere where I could make decisions for myself. So whatever I needed to do to get through the day, was what was going to happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that makes sense. I feel like you had a good attitude about it, at least, and you didn't freak out. You did the degree they wanted. You also did the other degrees you wanted. You got there.
Yeah.
You got there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So then was it just okay, now Mena has to go to medical school? Did you want to go to medical school? What happened when you graduated?
So I had a biology degree and a degree in Near Eastern Studies. So you don't have a lot of I don't know how to say it, because I don't want to insult anybody with those degrees.
There's a doctor, right? You could be a biologist, right? It's
it limits you, right?
Path. Yeah.
Right, and if let's say if you're really passionate about biology, right, those potential paths are things that would have been interesting to you, right? But if you're not, you don't even care about biology. I didn't even like biology. I hated biology. So I ended up doing neuroscience, which, I thought was at least more interesting because I was interested not necessarily in the biology part of the brain, but the cognitive part of the brain. And cognitive science was in its infancy at the time. It was just becoming a thing in the late 90s when I was in school. And now it's you can major in cognitive science. You can major in, things that I probably would have been more interested in. But at the time, the only thing that was really available in that realm was neurobio. And you could take other classes sort of connected to it, but sort of loosely connected, not directly connected. So to this day, I'm still fascinated by not the biology of the brain per se, but like how, how we think and how we become who we are and how we can change who we are. And, the idea of whether you could recreate a brain, right, just with, molecular sized parts, or is there something more to the brain? Is there something more to the human being that is not physical, that's intangible, that you could not recreate, just, with a 3D printer or something like that, right? Like those sort of thought experiments I would have and discuss with like, classmates in college, and like they still like sort of like interest me to this day. So I ended up, like you said, making the most of it. But at the end of the day, like it wasn't something that I was going to pursue long term. And I ended up doing like this, 1 week thing, like, shadowing and whatever. And in addition to like all the other like things that I used to love to get distracted with, one of them was video games. So I loved video games. And I remember watching a GI doctor do a colonoscopy, and he's looking up at the screen as he's doing the colonoscopy and like explaining everything. And, I was like, so you kind of control it with that like controller in your hand? And he goes, yeah, just like Nintendo. I was like, I love Nintendo. and that was the moment. Like, that was the moment I was like, okay, like they pay you to play Nintendo. I could do this. I can do this. And like, that's basically what I do. I do arthroscopic surgery, and, like it's just really complex video games. Like they happen to be real, but, arthroscopy is not that different from video games.
That's interesting, right? Because you're looking at a screen, right? You're looking at an image of what's happening inside, and then how exactly does it work when how do the tools work for that? Like, are you holding a controller? Is your hand moving the actual instrument?
So there's different things. The one that's probably closest to video games is robotic surgery, which I don't do. Robotic surgery tends to be in places that are like really difficult to reach, like, like the pelvis, or like, the general surgeons will use it in the belly. Urologists, will use it, for their stuff. Orthopedic surgeons tend not to use robots that are used by people like in other disciplines. We have different robots that sort of assist with joint replacements, but those don't have screens. Those have like sort of like these mechanical arms. Shoulder surgeons, we don't have a lot of robot toys, but arthroscopy is basically like if you picture just sort of like this handheld camera, but instead of being just like a GoPro, it's like a GoPro with a long tube, so that instead of the lens being what the GoPro lens looks like, which is this big lens, it's a tiny, tiny little nozzle lens at the end of like a long pencil-like thing, so you can stick the camera inside the joint and look from inside the joint. So you're looking up at the screen, but you're basically holding this like, GoPro with a pen on it, like, with the camera on the end of it. So it's cool. Pretty cool.
So your hands are controlling directly the motions, but you're watching the screen to see what you're doing?
Right.
Oh, that's neat. That's really neat. It's amazing just how much better it is, right? Like these forms of surgery now, back in the old days, you're just, cutting somebody wide open and manipulating their whole shoulder, right? But now there's like, you get in there and you get inside it and you fix it. It's so cool. That's really neat.
Right.
So do you enjoy being a shoulder surgeon?
And you actually see surgeon? Better. What's
that?
Oh,
yeah? You see better on the screen you would if something. You were just looking with your bare eye?
Yeah. So put your hand on your shoulder, right? So your hand is on the front of your shoulder, right? Now put your hand on the back of your shoulder, right? And now put your hand on the side of your shoulder, right? So if I was trying to look at a structure underneath where you put your finger, that would be where I put my incision, right?
Right.
So now what if you had a problem in your shoulder that wasn't just in the front where you put your finger, wasn't just in the back where you put your finger, not like on the side where you put your finger, but like you had some damage in your shoulder that was in the front, in the top, in the back, like in every part of your shoulder. Like,
Right.
where am I going to make that incision, right? Like, what, I'm just going to like fillet open the shoulder? I can't do that, right? Like, you're going to destroy so many things. You're going to destroy all these important structures just trying to get in and out of your shoulder. But what if instead, like, we put in a little camera that goes through like a 1 centimeter incision, and I put the camera in the front, and then I make a little incision. I go put the camera in the back, and then if I want to look from the side, I look from the side. And sometimes what I put in to that little hole that I made is an instrument, and sometimes it's the camera. So the camera and the instrument are going through the same holes, and we're going like sort of back and forth. Like, okay, I got to work from the front. Okay, I got to work from the back. And you know, as long as you're going through the same incisions, you end up making, you know, however many incisions you want. Like sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 12, but it's still the same little incisions, and you get to see the whole shoulder.
Oh, that's neat. But I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Like, as you're digging, you have to dig through all these structures to get into the middle. Right? Like you have to tear everything up going in to do traditional surgery.
Right.
Whereas this way, you just sneak right in there. Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like nowadays, at this age, in your 40s, you enjoy being an orthopedic. Are you orthopedic surgeon? Is that the official? You're a shoulder surgeon. Yeah. You like
that's
it
what
now?
they call me.
Yeah.
I do. I think I would say, like, even more positively than, you know, like making the best of it, which is kind of like what I did for a while. I think at this point, to a certain extent, I've crafted my life, like including my job, like in a way that I can truly say I'm doing what I was meant to do, right? Like, it was like one of those, like, okay, like there might have been other things that I could have done that I would also have said the same thing about, but like this definitely should have been on the list, right? Like, it's not something that like doesn't suit my interests. It doesn't keep my attention. It doesn't, and I tell people all the time that, like, I think one thing about your job that you don't realize should be a criteria is that it should make you a better person. And that's a really underestimated part of sort of career development and like job selection. It's like, oh, it's easy. It makes a ton of money. I'm really good at it. And it's like, okay, you said it's easy. It's like, yeah, it's easy. And it's like, okay, so where's the struggle then? And it's like, no struggle. Like, it's just so easy, and they give me a ton of money, and I flip a coin, and that's it. And it doesn't matter if it comes heads or tails, and then I make a ton of money. And it's like, okay, like, that's fine, but like, you know, that marriage, that saying about marriage, that like marriage, you know, doesn't make you happy, it makes you holy, right? Like your struggle, like with yourself and with, you know, challenges in your marriage, like that is something that is part of our path to sanctification, right? Like, that's something that we don't look at as a negative, right? Like, oh yeah, you gotta struggle, and like, you know, too bad. Like, no, like, you gotta struggle, and good for you. Like you gotta struggle. So I think that like medicine, you know, didn't necessarily suit all of my strengths, but like it pushed on my weaknesses just the right way to get me to grow, which I think is really important.
I love that. I love that way of looking at it. That's fantastic. So I have another question now. How did you meet your wife? Like, where does she come in all of this? You got married, you moved to East Massachusetts, you had 3 kids. How did that happen? Like, what?
Archangel Gabriel appeared, and he said, no, I moved to Boston. So I finished, like, this is not going to surprise you now, like, you've got the backstory. So I finished college, and I kind of like dragged my feet on my like med school applications, and my parents were like, aren't you going to apply? And I'm like, yeah, no. And they're like, you know, and they don't know that it's rolling admissions and you got to get your application in early. So I for the most part, like, truly and honestly, probably like sabotaged my like application. like deliberately, because I didn't really feel like I wanted to take a gap year, and they were like, what's that? And I'm like, where you like, you go do something else for a year and then you go to med school, and like they say it makes you a better doctor because you have world experience. No. Go to med school. I was like, okay. So I applied, and like, again, I spent all this money applying, and like, like it makes me a total spoiled brat. But like, I was just trying to get through the day. So I didn't get into med school. And one of my good friends, actually, her husband might be listening, who I love very much, my friend Avram from Seattle. So she told me, oh yeah, like, we've got a job as a medical assistant if you want to come out here. So I was like, okay, like that sounds like a good job experience, like to prepare me to get into med school, because I've already made my peace with the fact that like that's eventually where I want to end up. And B, it's not in New York. So I ended up going to Boston, where, this job as a medical assistant was, so I could go and like, get like, a little bit of space, and, not be so far from home, like be able to go back and visit, and also like sort of ready my application. And then the second time around, I actually like, actually put some effort into it, and like, got it in like the first day that like, applications open. And, I actually did like what you're supposed to do. And then I ended up getting into med school. But that year that I was working in Boston, I met my wife, Mary, who's, from Boston, from the area. And she was best friends with my friend Murmur, who's the one that helped me get that job in Boston.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Yeah. And so the two of you got married and lived happily ever after with the 3 kids, or at least the struggles that you have make you better, so it's okay.
Yeah. I think the one of the hardest things was so I got into med school in Boston. I got to med school in New York, but like the New York one was like a state school, so like it was like a lot cheaper. It was like a third of the price. So we had to be long distance for 4 years, so that was tough. And I applied to orthopedics, and I got into, or not got like, because it's like a match, like it's not like a getting into a program, but like right. I interviewed, and like I had prospects at like several different programs in New England, like New York, but I ended up actually matching in Cleveland. So I called her like on match day, and I was like, okay, like, looks like we got into Cleveland. And she started crying, and she's upset. But I think it was good for both of us to kind of go out there and like be by ourselves, and like sort of develop our own life and our own groove as a married couple, and then come back to Boston. So we were in Cleveland for 6 years after we got married.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I agree with that, though. I think there's something to be said for, especially, if she has a big family and they're all right there, like sometimes it's good to be away from family. And you'd had a lot of family influence already. You were separated. Right. That was good. That's good. Right. Well, so is she also Egyptian?
Yes. Yeah. Her parents both grew up in Alexandria. Her dad was an OB doctor. And that's another one of those examples of like this sort of like silent discrimination things where like you cannot be an obstetrician in Egypt. Like the Muslim majority will not allow a Christian minority to, because you can't have a Muslim woman be examined by a non-Muslim man like that, like just like it's like anathema to them. So if he wanted to be an obstetrician, so he went to med school there and then left to come to the U.S. To train in obstetrics here. And actually, he's an icon in like the Boston area, because he was an obstetrician at Cambridge Hospital from I want to say like the late 60s. I think the late 60s until like he retired like maybe 5 years ago. So if you see an Egyptian kid like aged like 5 to like 40 in the Boston area, you can ask them like, oh, who birthed you? Was it Dr. Magdi Solomon? And they'd be like, yeah, how'd you know? Like there's like a 89% chance that like, if somebody was born in the Boston area in that like 40-year span, like he was their obstetrician.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a beautiful thing. I love that.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
love that.
Actually, he'd tell these kids, he'd be like, he'd see them at church, they'd be misbehaving. They're like, he's like, I took you out, I'll put you back in. Pull it together.
That's awesome. So speaking of medicine and doctors, what do you do for Ocamper? You're involved in the Ocamper organization, right?
Mostly make jokes.
You just entertain at the board meetings and keep everybody going.
That's like my primary job. So Randa, our president, she's awesome. She's very serious. She's very like detail oriented, and we've got an all-star cast. Like I don't want to like miss anybody and like go through the names, but like we've got superstars on that team, and we've got our conference coming up, and I'm really excited for that. And Randa's, hosting it. So, she'd kill me if I didn't say that you need to go to Ocamper, OCAMPR.org and register for our conference. Don't worry about what the deadline is. Just do it today. Do it right now.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And
So
it's Orthodox
I think
Association, Medical Psychology, and something
religion.
else. Religion.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's basically like
yeah.
people, everybody's interested in some way, shape, or form in some kind of theology. And I don't think that it necessarily needs to be this like sort of like theoretical, like idea type of theology, which I personally am very much interested in. But I think, somebody like my wife who, you say any theological term and like she clams up and she's like, I know what we're talking about. And like, it's so like, we just like this, retreat that we just did this weekend, like where I was talking about like, the 1 Corinthians 12 and the unity and diversity was an identity retreat, right? Like, so that was like the final thing about like our identity in our relationships with each other, like identity as being part of a community, right? So she was talking about identity as an icon of Christ, right? Like how we present Christ to people and how we grow with time to become more like Christ. And we were discussing like ahead of time with like, the head of our service, the high school service, his name's Bessem. So Bess and Mary and I were discussing, and it was so interesting that like I had to avoid any like sort of like theological terms, but like I was like, Mary, like you're talking about our relationship with Christ. You like that? She's like, yes. I was like, and the more we get to know Christ, the more ourselves we become, because Christ helps us to discover ourselves, just like he did with every single person that he met in the Gospels, right? And she's like, yeah, absolutely. I was like, so you've given like 1,000 talks about authenticity and becoming your true self, right? Yes. I'm like, that is a theological talk, right? You don't need to use theological language, right, for it to be at its core something that is Christian. If it's something at its core that is Christian, then it's theological by praxis, not theological by, by word, right? And and to me, it's the same thing. And that's what I love about Ocamper is that like, it's not necessarily theologians that, talk about theological concepts. It's theologians that practice theological ideas and work them out on a day-to-day basis. So whether they're doctors, whether they're nurses, whether they're in the healthcare field, whether they're psychology people, whether they're in the mental health field, regardless of where you're coming from, connecting and talking about like, oh, like, how do you attend to the full person? Like, well, that's informed by our Christian anthropology, like seeing the person as, not just the body, but as a body and a soul and a spirit. Like, oh, that makes sense. I can't just attend to their shoulder. Like, I need to attend to their whole person. Like, I need to respect their full person, and I need to interact and engage and, and treat their whole full person. I think it's an incredible space where, these sorts of things that otherwise don't get discussed, right? Like we end up in our silos, like, oh, the theologians are just talking about, impassable suffering. And it's like, who cares? Like, oh, I do. But it's like, yeah, but nobody else does, right? And the psychologists are talking about feelings. Like, I don't have feelings. I'm a surgeon. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you should. And then like, the doctors are talking about like, oh, like this medicine or that medicine, like, but it comes together really nicely because everybody shares sort of their perspective, and it ends up being, as a good marriage or as a good friendship, a unity in diversity, and like people coming together. And like, even though we have different starting points, our destination is essentially the same.
I love that. I think, and I love Ocamper. I mean, honestly, like, I always wish, like, oh, if only I were in a medical field of some kind or a psychology field of some kind.
But you don't need to be. Like, honestly,
can anybody go?
Anybody can, and honestly, like, I don't think, like, I think it needs to have some sort of identity, right? Like, it can't just be like the Orthodox Christian Association of dude, whatever, man. Like, it needs to be something, right? So
Right.
It's medicine, psychology, and religion. But I don't think that it would be irrelevant to somebody that owns a small business, right? Because owning a small business, you have to be a psychologist, right? Like, you have to understand your customer. You have to understand the people coming in. And like, if they want to buy something, you sell them something. But if they need like therapy and like you need to like listen to them and you're good at your job, then yeah, like oh man, sounds like you're having a rough day, man. And like, you just like, maybe you're the only person that person gets to talk to, and they're not paying you to be their therapist. They're buying like wrenches from, aisle 3, but you're their therapist, right? Like, and I don't think that it's this like nebulous outside thing like reserved for doctors. I think it's a very practical, real thing that anybody that relates to people on any level, like, and cares and attends to a full person would benefit from being that.
I think that's true, really. I think any kind of like ministry, in quotes, right? Like, and that doesn't have to be associated with your parish or with your church, but any way that you're ministering to people, like, that's really what Ocamper is talking about. And actually, it's neat. I noticed the title of the upcoming conference is Living Liturgy in Practice, right? And that's exactly it, right? Like, we receive communion, we have to walk out into the world and figure out how to live the liturgy. And that's Orthodox care in a rapidly changing world. So, guys, that conference is coming up November 3rd through 5th. Mena's going to be there, and this is your opportunity to meet him in person. The website is ocamper.org, and you can go online and you can register right now to show up there in Glenview, Illinois in November. I think it's going to be really neat. And Mena, I so enjoyed getting to know you. This was a blast. And
you should totally come to the conference.
I would.
And if you come to the conference,
I tried to, and I can't come that weekend because my kids have stuff going on, and I'm a little frustrated, to tell you the honest truth, because I would love to be there.
How old are your kids?
Well, the ones that are in my way currently, God bless them, are 10 and 12 and 15. But, I've got a whole problem.
It's a busy time. That's a busy time.
It is.
So listen, we're just going to ask you every year. Like, every year you'd be like, can you come? And you'd be like, no, I got soccer. You're like, oh, can you come? No, we got math leagues.
Invite me every year. One of these days I'm going to make it, because I think
eventually we'll get to meet in person.
Well, Mena, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It was great. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. And come back next week. We'll meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian. Take care. Well, that was a great show. Thank you all so much for joining.